Hello, hello, and welcome to Self-Care is Sexy. My name is Chris, and I'll be your host. We're a podcast that's here to generate and share self-care ideas with each other. Last episode was all about how to get self-care when you just don't feel like it. And we got into some of the reasons why you might not be feeling like making yourself the priority. Because the reality is you're not always going to feel motivated to take care of yourself. So we really dig to the root of that and help you find ways to get out of that funk. So if that's something you're dealing with and you missed that show, you can always check us out on iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon, YouTube, Spreaker, Stitcher, Podbean, PodNation, really anywhere you get your podcasts from. I want to give you a preview of what to expect from today's show. Today, I'm going to be talking about observing others when they make self-care the priority. And usually on this show, I tell you not to care about what other people are doing and not compare yourself to others. But today, we're going to be looking at the benefits of seeing other people make self-care the priority and how we can use those observations to really develop the best practices for ourselves when it comes to self-care. But first, a few quick housekeeping notes. All right, so today I want to talk about what's going on when we see other people making self-care important. Or even better yet, what happens when other people see us making self-care the priority. And I want to talk about this right now because, as the season is shifting and the holidays are on the horizon, our schedules are going to start getting busier, as we're starting to venture out of the house a little bit more. And as we get into that holiday season and everything sort of ramps up, self-care tends to take the back seat. And so today's show is going to be a little bit of a reminder, a little bit of a pep talk as we get into that season of why it's important to keep an eye out for when others are making self-care the priority. Now, I'm not talking about literally hovering over someone while they're getting their massage or their weekly nail appointment to watch them get their own self-care. That's not what we're talking about today. What we're actually talking about is when we see other people making self-care the priority and how our perception of that sort of changes over time depending on where we're at in our own self-care journey. So whether or not you're brand new to self-care and you're just making that incredibly empowering decision to really put yourself first, or whether you're a badass who's been doing this for a long time and you just like the weekly check-in for motivation, either way, it's really important that we pay attention to when we see other people making self-care the priority. Because what happens is, first of all, when you see other people putting themselves first, let's think about that. What does that actually look like? What are they saying? What words are they using? How are they acting? How are they responding? And what are some examples that you see of other people making self-care that priority? Now, again, I'm not talking about watching people do self-care or what examples other people are doing to get their self-care in. What I want us to start thinking about is when we see someone else, making that massage appointment like a non-negotiable, or we observe people who have a set boundary, right? Whatever with their friends or family or whatever practice they have in place that is an act of self-care. Well, if you are new to self-care and this is all kind of a brand new concept, you've maybe been locked into people-pleasing and possibly a codependency, sort of trench, and you're coming out of that thinking well, maybe I should start changing the way I treat myself to get the results I want in life. Well, when you're new and you see other people making self-care the priority, it tends to stand out to you in the beginning, and it's going to look a little bitchy. You're going to see people, making themselves the priority, setting their boundaries, standing up for themselves. And when you observe that, it's going to look like they're being kind of rude or aggressive. And why is that? Why do you think that's the perception? Why do we see it that way at first? Maybe there's a lot of thoughts around when you're watching someone else, make themselves a priority or stand up for themselves or set boundaries. You might be having the thoughts of like, why did they get to do it and I can't? Or thoughts like, it's so easy for them, but like not for me. Or even a thought of like, oh, well, it must be nice to not have to like answer to anybody, right? Like those are some thoughts that we have in the beginning when we're observing other people do self-care. And the reason that is a common thread is because in the beginning, when you're shifting your priorities from taking care of everyone else for doing for other people to find your own self-worth, and you're shifting that to focusing your energy on yourself, you'll start to pick up on it naturally when you see others do it. It's like when you buy a new car and then all of a sudden you see that new car everywhere. It's that same effect. And in the beginning, when you start to notice it and it starts to stand out, it stands out in a negative way in your head because you've probably been conditioned that self-care is selfish, or that setting boundaries is rude, or that saying no to an obligation or not being Captain Save-'em all the time is aggressive and self-serving and mean and all these negative things. And if you deal with a lot of guilt after doing self-care, like you set up an appointment for a massage, you get your massage, you're like totally post-massage bliss, you feel great, but then you get home to a pile of dishes and you feel like shit because you didn't do the dishes first, and maybe you can't really afford it and now you're broke, and so you have all this guilt around getting that massage. Well, it comes from the conditioning in the beginning of your self-care journey, the conditioning you've been through that tells you it's not good to put yourself first and that your value is only found in what you can do for other people. And as you get better in self-care and you make self-care the priority, there's this shift that occurs, and the difference starts to show up. Like you start celebrating other people when you see them making self-care the priority. You start really rooting for them and like being like, yeah, that's awesome. And I just want to say, like, a lot of times we can really cheer on our friends and the people we love and care about when they take the time to make self-care the priority, when they put themselves at the top of the list, when they set boundaries. But we really have a hard time giving ourselves that same encouragement. And so I really want you to keep that in mind as we're going through these kind of observations today and looking at what it is to see someone else giving themselves permission and how that gives us permission. I want us to really be thinking about, do we give ourselves that same permission? And secondly, it's really, really important when we're thinking about, like, when we're observing other people making self-care the priority, if we're new, that we're not taking it personal. Right? Like, so if you invite somebody out to go do something and they say no, or you ask for help, which, congratulations, thank you for asking for help. I wish more people were clear and direct and would ask for help more often. So you ask for help and somebody says no. Or maybe you're planning that upcoming family gathering for the holidays. Like, maybe that's something you're trying to get back to, maybe after a year or so of not being able to. And people are saying no or are not committing and things like that. You have to get to a place where you're not taking that personal. Because 99.9% of the time, when someone is saying no to a social event or an obligation or participating in something, it's because they're choosing themselves first. And that doesn't mean that they're conscientiously or actively not choosing you. That's the perception shift that you will start to have when you go from self-care kind of being a new concept and something that you're working on, and when it shifts to something that is a way of life that you're committed to, that is a non-negotiable. Because a lot of times people think that, oh, someone's not available to me because of something I did or something I said or something to do with me. And the truth is, people just don't care that much about you to really put the energy there. They're really just focused on what's best for them. And when you take that personal reaction out of it, it literally gives you permission to allow that person to do what they need to do and for you to problem solve or figure out a different social scenario. And it also, as you're getting more into self-care and making that a priority, it also gives you that permission as well every time you run into it. Because what other people are doing with their time and what they think about you or what's going on with them, it typically has nothing to do with you. And frankly, it's none of your business, right? Like, you've heard the saying, no is a complete sentence. And every time you come up against that, let it be a reminder to you that you have the right to say no yourself and to choose what's best for you when it comes to obligations or helping someone or, any type of social event that isn't serving you, or maybe you have some other self-care planned. Like, every time you get that no or you experience the receiving end of it, it is a reminder to you that you get to choose yourself when it's best. You get to make the decisions that are best for you and your own self-care. Third, when we're really observing when other people are taking care of themselves, we're seeing how they respond to requests for their time and energy and effort. And we see them say no, or we see them set a boundary, or we see them making their massage appointment, a non-negotiable. Doesn't matter what's going on in their lives, they always make that appointment a priority. When we observe that and we see that, in the beginning of our self-care journey, we tend to do this comparison thing, which what I was talking about in the beginning is that I don't want us to compare ourselves to other people or where they're at in their journey, because comparing is the killer of compassion. It is the killer of permission. Comparing is saying, I should be where this person is. I should be doing what they're doing, or they should be doing what I'm doing, regardless of so many different factors that play into how someone came to the ability to really make self-care the priority. So when we're observing it and we see people like in our lives, saying no to obligations they can't fulfill because they have the foresight to make self-care the priority instead. When we see that, we cannot compare ourselves to that and be like, why can't I do that? Because it is not about us doing our journey like them. It's about seeing it, observing it, and it being a reminder that we can too. And when you very first start watching people make self-care the priority, and you get to know someone and you see that they are just really, they stand up for themselves. They're just really confident in who they are and how they want to show up in the world. And they carry themselves in a way that you're like, ooh, I want to emulate that. You don't want to get into the trap of comparing yourself to that. You just want to borrow from them their language, their habits, and their behaviors that can benefit you in your self-care journey. But you don't want to compare yourself to them because you don't know what factors got them to where they are. And emulating other people's good behaviors to help create a shift inside you is an act of self-care. That is a big deal. Now, at first, when you're very first starting to put yourself first and you're very first starting to make you the priority, and you really have a self-care routine built into your day, and you have these non-negotiables, at first it is going to feel really weird to say no. And you're going to feel the urge and the pull to justify your no, to justify your boundary setting, to justify why it's important for you to get done what you need to get done, even if the chores don't get done, even if the kids don't get to their appointment that they need, or even if the spouse has to pick up, a chore or